3,000 subscribers? Son of a bitch, this really is going to be a monthly thing. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, I say a huge thank you to all of you for all your love and support for my channel and my videos. And as always, the only way to celebrate this is to make a Fire Emblem video. Well, that or a Monster Hunter video, considering it's those videos that most people like and get the most views on my channel, despite the fact that both these series aren't exactly mainstream. What are you going to do? Now, there are many aspects of the Fire Emblem series that I've discussed in the past, but most of the time I like to talk about the characters, since in my opinion they're the best part of the game. The one series of games that I have yet to properly touch upon, however, is the Tellius series, or in this case, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are home to quite possibly the largest cast of Fire Emblem characters in the series, each of them with their own unique personalities and stories to tell. Whether they be main characters, side characters, bosses or non-playable characters, the beings of Tellius help to make this world feel truly alive and special. Which brings us to today. After all, I felt that for an occasion like this, I should show my love for the Tellius series, and since I felt that in order to show my thanks to all my subscribers, I've decided to give you 2 videos for the price of 1. So join me as I celebrate my 3,000 subscribers special by counting down my top 20 characters from both Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Now before we begin, I just want to clear a few things up here and there. Firstly, this video is just my own opinion, and I'm simply ranking these characters in terms of which are my favourites rather than the ones that are just the best statistically. On that note, the second thing I need to point out is that I will be taking every single character from both games into account, so bosses and NPCs won't be left out just because you can't use them on the battlefield. Thirdly, is that please bear in mind that I will be looking at how the characters are in both Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, so there could be a character who isn't good in one game but is great in another on this list, and vice versa. Also, there will be spoilers for both games since I kind of have to spoil the events that take place when discussing certain characters. And with that all cleared up, I think it's time I took yet another leaf out of Ike's book. So join me, my fellow YouTubers, let us band together to celebrate this victory together as one, not just as people on the internet, but as friends, as a community, as family. When most people think of a knight, they think of someone who is brave, clever, calm, and above all else, honourable and level-headed. This holds true in Fire Emblem since most cavaliers and paladins are characters who, while having their own unique characteristics and personalities, more than often have all the qualities that makes a knight, well, a knight. So could someone please explain to me how someone like KIERAN became a knight? Yes, starting off this countdown, we have the axe-wielding maniac himself, KIERAN. Now, KIERAN isn't exactly the most standout character in the Tellius series, or a standout unit, but I have a soft spot for KIERAN, and he was actually pretty useful during both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. KIERAN first appeared in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance as a member of the Crimea Royal Knights. In the beginning of the game, KIERAN is captured by Dayan until he's rescued by Ike, who he joins in order to fight for Crimea and serve Princess Alencia. During Radiant Dawn, KIERAN, alongside Geoffrey and the rest of the Royal Knights, fight to stop the Crimea Civil War, as well as protecting Queen Alencia during the war between the Laguz Alliance and the Benyon Empire. Unlike most knights, KIERAN is someone who is hot-blooded, energetic, and one hell of a loudmouth. He gets excited over the thought of battle and thinks himself to be the greatest warrior ever, constantly announcing his name when charging into the battlefield and always training his hardest to protect his honour. I get the feeling both KIERAN and Owain were cut from the same cloth. Now, how someone like KIERAN became part of the Crimea Royal Knights, I'll never know, but despite his rather immature and otherwise over-the-top personality, KIERAN is just so much fun to listen to. I swear, the words that come out of this guy's mouth are some of the funniest things I've heard in just about any Fire Emblem game, which is saying a lot, mind you, and his supports paint him to be such an over-the-top and ridiculous meathead, especially in his supports with Marcia. While this may not seem fitting for a knight, especially a royal knight, you can't help but love the guy, especially considering he keeps on injuring himself during training without even noticing, which still baffles me as to how he became a knight in the first place. Then again, if someone like Makalov can become a royal knight, anything's possible at this point. Maybe Crimea just has really low standards. Gameplay wise, KIERAN was an unusual unit for me, in the sense that he was very different from your typical cavalier or paladin. This is mainly due to the fact that most cavaliers are very well-rounded units, who, while not being able to dominate certain enemies, can hold their own against just about anyone. KIERAN wasn't anything like that, since he was pretty much a wildcard for me, as he wasn't a unit who I could always rely on, but rather he would either perform a miracle and save the day, or completely botch things up and doom us all. I found that despite KIERAN being an overall very well balanced unit, he often had rather low skill, which made it hard for him to hit certain enemies, but made up for it by being able to deal a lot of damage, so there were times where he could one-shot certain units and get them out of the way, or just miss his target and leave himself completely open to a beating. While not the deepest or most interesting character, KIERAN is one of the most enjoyable characters I've had the pleasure of using in the Fire Emblem series, as well as being one unit who came in handy during the worst possible times and helped me out of many sticky situations. And for that, I'll always have a soft spot for him, no matter how many times he screws up. One of the things that made the Tellius game stand out from the other Fire Emblem games was just how much story and history was focused on the Laguz. I mean, these types of characters have existed in other Fire Emblem games, but it was the Tellius series that devoted the most time to them, going into their history, the different Laguz races, and their own unique traits. Out of all the Laguz species, the Dragon Laguz were the ones that were seen the least, as they were considered to be the strongest of the Laguz, naturally, and their race was shrouded in mystery in order to paint them as legends. Now despite this, they still played a very big part in the story of both Tellius games, and often most Dragon Laguz, while not taking their dragon form until the end of the game, appeared many times during the story and got a lot of character development in order to make them fleshed out and memorable characters. As is the case with number 19 on this list, who is in my opinion the best Dragon Laguz in the Tellius series, Nasir. Nasir is a funny one for me. Not to say he's a bad character or anything, no, I think he's a really good character. But he doesn't appear as much as other characters like RANULF or even Sephiroth in Path of Radiance, and hell, in Radiant Dawn he really doesn't do much concerning the game's story. Yet for some reason I really like this guy, and he's one of the few late game units who I've used on my team constantly. Nasir first appeared in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, and was responsible for escorting the Grail mercenaries into Benion. From the get-go, you get the impression that Nasir is a very humble and compassionate being, as he harbours no hatred towards the Bjork, and in fact chooses to live among them in order to learn more about them and hopefully use that knowledge to mend the bonds between both races. As the game goes on, however, Nasir turns out to be a double agent for Dayan, and he steals Mist's medallion and gives it to Ashnard. Now this may paint the picture that Nasir is a traitorous backstabber, but that's not the case, since his reason for being a double agent is because he wants to rescue Ina, as she means a lot to him, and it's more the case of him being forced to do these things rather than willingly doing it. In Radiant Dawn, Nasir only appears twice in that game, once during Part 3 concerning the Laguz war with Benion, and during the endgame, and while he doesn't do much, it's still nice to see him again, and he can be a great help when going up against Ashera. Speaking of which, Nasir is one of the very few late game units who I actively use at the end of the game. When it comes to Fire Emblem, late game units are units that I pretty much never use unless I have to, such as the case with Athos. Because I've spent the entire game training my team and getting to know and love these characters, I find it incredibly difficult to simply swap out for another unit I've never used, regardless of how strong they are. Nasir is one of the few exceptions to this, since Nasir is one of the most useful units ever and can really turn the tide of battle in your favour when things get rough. Stat-wise, Nasir is overall really good and has fantastic HP, as well as good luck and skill, and while his defense is rather poor, he's still one hell of a good unit, and the fact that he's a dragon just makes him all the more better. Nasir, while not being a very prominent character, is a case of doing the best with the little screen time you have, since whenever we do see him, his actions make you remember and sympathise with him, and despite being used in the endgame of both Tellius games, he's still one hell of a great unit on your team, and the fact that, of course, he's a fucking dragon! Like I said before, late game units are units that I don't like to add to my team. I just find it really hard to add a new unit into my team when I've already established how my team works and each unit has its roles and responsibilities. Not only that, but because they join so late in the game, trying to do support with them is a bitch and a half, so trying to find out more about them or reach A-level support with another unit is often more hassle than it's worth. As is the case with number 18 on this list, who is a character that joins very late in the game, and getting them to reach A support with a certain other character is harder than Chapter 14 of Fire Emblem Binding Blade. Ugh. Anyway, it's none other than Queen Elincia's most trusted knight, Sir Geoffrey. Geoffrey is rather similar to Nasir in the case of not only being a very useful late game unit, but also being a rather interesting and likeable character despite not being in the game that much. Geoffrey first appeared in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, much like everyone else on this countdown, and is the brother of Lucia. When the Grail mercenaries made it back to Crimea with Princess Elincia, Geoffrey, Lucia and Bastion are waiting for them in order to welcome and serve their new queen, and thus Geoffrey became the head of the Royal Knights. In Radiant Dawn, Geoffrey plays a much bigger role, as he is in charge of preventing the uprising that takes place in Crimea from getting out of hand, as well as defending Crimea during Queen Elincia's absence when the war between the Laguz and Benyon broke out. While he doesn't get too much screen time or character development, Geoffrey still leaves an impact on you thanks to his incredible loyalty and compassion to Elincia. Geoffrey is a knight through and through, and his supports, hell even general conversations with Elincia, show that Geoffrey does his hardest to defend Elincia even when she orders him not to, and even threatens to strip him of his rank and title, since Elincia feels she simply cannot stand back and do nothing as her men die for her and she should fight alongside them, since his life means so much to her and simply watching him fight and die without being able to do anything is too much for her to bear. Their relationship reminds me a lot of the relationship between Seth and Erica, and I really like the chemistry these two have together, and I'm also glad that at the end of Radiant Dawn they do get married. Yes, I ship Geoffrey and Elincia. Gameplay wise, Geoffrey in Path of Radiance is an overall good unit, and he's got good skill and resistance, though he has low speed which kinda sucks for a paladin, and since he joins you so late in the game it's hard to add him to your team, so for me he's ultimately wasted in that game. In Radiant Dawn however, Geoffrey is a much better unit and one of the most valuable units during Part 2 of Radiant Dawn. While his stats are largely the same, the thing that makes Geoffrey so awesome is two things. First is his skill Paragon, which doubles the experience points earned. Also helping this is that this guy starts with a Brave Lance. Yeah, you heard me, a Brave Lance. So not only does he have one of the best weapons in any Fire Emblem game, but it also makes up for his low speed stat. Sometimes being a memorable and likeable character is doing the best with the time you've got, no matter how small it is. Geoffrey is a shining example of this, as though he's not in both games that much, he still stands out as a strong character and a very useful unit, especially in the case of Radiant Dawn. In fact, I get the feeling that if Elincia didn't meet up with Ike and the Grail mercenaries, Geoffrey would have been the early game paladin you get in most Fire Emblem games. Hey man, if that were the case, I sure as hell wouldn't complain. As mentioned previously, the Tellius games focused a lot more on the Laguz species compared to other Fire Emblem games, and the race that was arguably featured the most throughout both games was the Beast race. The beast race of Laguz were land dwellers and took the form of lions, cats, tigers and wolves, and they were featured very often in both Path of Radiance and especially in Radiant Dawn when they went to war with the Benyon Empire. In this case, number 17 on this list goes to who I think is the best beast Laguz in the Tellius series, though admittedly more for his character rather than his use on the battlefield, and it's none other than the trusted vassal of the Lion King KIERAN, RANULF. I swear, RANULF has got to be one of the coolest Fire Emblem characters ever. This guy has such a laid back and cool attitude you can't just help but go "Hey" whenever time you see him. Not to mention he's one of the strongest Laguz in the entire series and a key character in both stories, so you know, there's that too. Now RANULF made his debut in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and he's the commander of the Laguz army and the vassal of the Lion King KIERAN. He helps the Grail mercenaries get transport from Gallia into Benyon, as well as joining the Crimean army to fight back against Dayan. In Radiant Dawn, RANULF, along with Skimir, lead the charge in the Laguz Alliance's war with the Benyon Empire, and he hires Ike and the Grail mercenaries to help them out. Since the Laguz aren't the best when it comes to tactics and level-headedness, in fact RANULF mainly finds himself trying to stop Skimir from running into the battlefield like a complete idiot. RANULF is a cheerful and friendly person, as well as being surprisingly clever and intuitive, especially for a Laguz. He always seems to know exactly what everyone's thinking and tends to make the best decisions among the group. As such, a lot of characters warm up to him easily, and you get the feeling that he's the type of person that you could easily talk to and chill with, since he's just so laid back and cool. RANULF is also fearless and selfless, as he will often fight opponents that are far stronger than him just to make sure everyone else is safe, and often his actions are in everyone's best interest rather than his own. I mean, this guy took on the Black Knight for God's sake. That's some serious balls. Also, unlike a lot of Lagoos, RANULF is calm and even-tempered, since he doesn't just blindly run into battle without thinking, and even when people throw abuse and hate towards him, he doesn't react violently or let it get to him, which paints the picture that RANULF is the cool older brother you never had, since he just seems so cool and knows exactly what to do. Gameplay wise, I haven't used RANULF that much, but whenever I did use him, he was a very useful unit. Despite not being as strong as other Lagoos like Skimir, RANULF has very high speed and skill, and also loads of HP as well. So not only can RANULF be used for quick kills, but he also works well as a tank and is a very dependable unit much like a paladin. When you come down to it, RANULF, while not being as fleshed out as characters like Ike or as useful on the battlefield, is just cool in every sense of the word. Every time this dude is on screen, you just nod your head and say, oh yeah, because RANULF is just one of those people you really just can't say no to, and I just love this guy. If I had used him on the battlefield more in both games, then I may have placed him higher on this list, but sadly that isn't the case, and you're just gonna have to settle for number 17, buddy. I still love you though, dude. Fire Emblem games have a knack for including one-of-a-kind characters or races within their stories. Often these characters are incredibly unique even among the people of Fire Emblem, and they often hold great importance to the story as a whole. Examples of this are Ninian and Nils from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, and Robin from Fire Emblem Awakening. Well, this type of thing also occurred in both Fratellius games thanks to the Heron clan. The Herons are a race of Lagoos that are almost angelic in nature due to their ability to see into people's hearts as well as being able to perform the sacred magic of Galda. They are also the rarest species in the game due to the events that take place, so the number of Herons in the Tellia series is very limited. With that said, however, there is one particular Heron that stood out the most to me and was by far the most interesting character and best Heron on the battlefield, and this Heron is none other than Prince REYSON. Man, 3 Lagoos in a row? What, do I have an obligation to represent all the Lagoos races in Tellius? Nevertheless, REYSON was a character who, just from his appearance in Path of Radiance, wouldn't have made it on here, though I still would have liked him. His role in Radiant Dawn is what put him on this list in the end, since I found him to be a more endearing character, as well as a very useful unit on the battlefield, especially during the endgame. REYSON plays a huge role in Path of Radiance's story, as he is one of the few surviving members of the Heron clan after the Serenus forest was burnt down by the Benioff Empire and most of the Herons were killed. After the forest was burnt down, both he and his sister Leanne were kept safe by the Hawk King TIBARN and the Raven King Nasala. However, the Raven King tricks REYSON and sells him out to Duke Tanis of the Benioff Empire, and in a fit of rage, REYSON gives the Duke a swift falcon punch to the face, or in this case, a heron punch. Later on during the 4-part slugfest at his daybreak, he spots Ike carrying Leanne on his back, and once the two are reunited, they sing the Galda of Rebirth and restore the forest back to the way it was. In Radiant Dawn, REYSON, after hearing the truth behind the Heron massacre by his brother Raphael, he joins the fight against the Benioff Empire as he is concerned for TIBARN's safety since once again they were betrayed by Nasala. Yeah, this guy's a bit of a backstabber. Because of the Benioff massacre, REYSON is cold, hot-tempered, spiteful and just plain moody, which is understandable considering the situation, but his behaviour is odd amongst Herons, who are known for being kind, soft and very tranquil. Also, because he spent so much time with the Hawk tribe, he picked up some nasty habits like being violent towards others and stubborn as a mule. His attitude changes once he reunites with Leanne, as he no longer hates the Bjork and doesn't lose his temper nearly as much, and just stops being a prepubescent teen with a stick shoved up his ass. This is more evident in Radiant Dawn, where even though he's still stubborn and a bit cold at times, he's a lot more even-tempered and easier to be around, as well as not giving people the cold shoulder all the time, and just an overall more mature and nicer guy. This shows REYSON's growth as a character, as well as his true nature now that he is back with his family, and he learns that hatred and revenge will get you nowhere in the end. Plus, I really like his relationship with TIBARN, as he sees him as the older brother or father figure and tries to be just like him despite his true nature. Gameplay wise, REYSON and the rest of the Heron clan are essentially the dancers of the Tellius series, since they're able to allow units to move twice in one turn, as well as having their own unique skills like healing up units by standing next to them. Now, being a Heron, REYSON is obviously frail and can't fight back, so make sure he doesn't get too close to an enemy or he'll shatter like glass. However, REYSON, if used correctly, is a very good unit and one of the most important members of your team, especially in the case of Radiant Dawn. This is because when REYSON transforms into his Laguz form, he can allow up to 4 units to move twice in one turn, which can be a huge help during the last chapters of the game. And even though yes, Raphael can allow 4 units to move untransformed, and Leanne doesn't need to be transformed in order to move multiple units as well, plus she is just the most adorable little thing, REYSON can at least take a hit from magical attacks and screen nukes, unlike the other 2 who will die in one shot. And considering the fact that some of these attacks simply can't be avoided, REYSON is clearly the better choice. It was this usefulness on the battlefield and welcome change of character that made REYSON my favourite Heron in the Tellius series and one of my favourite characters in the Tellius series. In fact, if it wasn't for the next entry on this list, REYSON would have been my favourite Laguz character. But unfortunately, I couldn't say no to the next entry on this list, so sorry about that, buddy. Please don't punch me in the face. I thought you Herons were meant to be gentle. Okay, let's set the Wayback Machine for September 2014. I had just uploaded top 10 Fire Emblem classes on YouTube, and it was pretty much the video that got my channel where it is today. Now in that video, I talked about how the Laguz were my 5th favourite class in the entire series, and that my favourite Laguz, or in this case, Monarchite, was Naui. However, if you remember, I only chose Naui since I didn't want to include my real favourite Laguz, since he was essentially a Laguz Lord, or in this case, Laguz King. Well, now it's time to give this king the true respect he deserves, so please give it up for my favourite Laguz in the Fire Emblem series, the King of the Hawks, TIBARN. Man, this has been long overdue. Well, fear not, my good King TIBARN, your time has finally come, since you are my favourite Laguz King and my favourite Laguz unit in general. Now when it comes to TIBARN, I'm not gonna lie, both Kanagas and Nasala are more interesting and well developed characters, but I find TIBARN to be the more enjoyable and just badass of the Laguz Kings, and gameplay wise, oh man, gameplay wise, TIBARN is a literal monster! TIBARN is the king of the Hawk tribe of Laguz and was in Path of Radiance to begin with. However, he didn't play too big of a role when compared to other characters like REYSON, Nasala, Kanagas and so on, and he could only be used in the endgame as an actual unit, but he still left an impact on me with his presence and warrior-like mannerisms. In Radiant Dawn, TIBARN gets his much needed spotlight since he, along with RANULF and Skimir, lead the charge against the armies of Benyon after being betrayed by Nasala, and he joins Alincia's army as they go to confront the goddess Ashira. During this time, TIBARN gets much more development and character building, since in Path of Radiance you could tell he was a warrior of respect and honour, but also very brash and bloodthirsty during the game's more intense moments. During Radiant Dawn, TIBARN is still a headstrong warrior, but here you get to see his more kingly and honourable side of him, since there are many conversations he has with Ike and Alincia, showing more of his views on the situation at hand and his moral compass as a whole, as well as his fight with Zelgius where he lets him go to aid the descendants of Benyon rather than continue fighting. That being said, he still has his savage moments, like when he hangs Soph from a cliff, or the fact that he wants to rip Nasala to pieces, which is kind of a running gag throughout both of the games. Gameplay wise, TIBARN is a fucking monster! I mean, it makes sense given that he's the Laguz King, and has some of the highest stats in the game, but seriously, holy shit did this guy kicks ass on some next level. Because his stats were so high, TIBARN killed every single unit he went up against, and never did he leave a single enemy alive. It's for these reasons that TIBARN was my favourite Laguz unit in the entire Fire Emblem series, since yes, while he's not the most fleshed out Laguz character, he's one of the most entertaining and coolest Laguz or even characters in the series, as well as someone you can't help but admire for just how daunting and badass he is. Not to mention, he's quite possibly the strongest Fire Emblem unit I've ever had the pleasure of using, and that's saying a lot, and thus TIBARN is not only the king of the Hawks, but in my eyes, he is the king of all Laguz. Suck on that one, Deginsia, you stubborn old fossil. Now, I've gone on record saying that generals are the greatest class in the Fire Emblem series, and even to this day I'll stand by that statement. Now, a lot of people like generals as well, but everyone seems to be split on who is the best general. Well, concerning the generals that appear in the Tellier series, this guy isn't the best general, and I don't hear many people regarding him as such. But that doesn't stop him from being a completely awesome general and is such an amazing unit on the battlefield. And the general in question isn't Brom, it's not Toronio, and it's certainly not Meg, it's GATRIE, baby. Well, it certainly took a while, but we finally got round to talking about the Grail Mercenaries. The Grail Mercenaries are unique amongst most Fire Emblem teams, as unlike most games where your team of units are often Knights of the Kingdom, mixed in with a few sellswords here and there following under a single lord, the Grail Mercenaries are a group of, well, mercenaries who do what they do as a way of living, and they do it as a family as they've all known each other for quite some time, rather than just a bunch of strangers forming a team. Thanks to this, the connection I and a lot of players have with the Grail Mercenaries is much more personal than most Fire Emblem games, and they themselves are one of the best Fire Emblem teams in terms of gameplay. In fact, aside from the Shepherds from Awakening, the Grail Mercenaries are my favourite team in the Fire Emblem series, and GATRIE certainly helps in this regard. GATRIE, along with all the Grail Mercenaries, appeared in Path of Radiance, and GATRIE was the knight of the group, as well as being a veteran alongside SHINON and Titania. Being a veteran, GATRIE isn't too happy about having to perform small jobs just so Ike and Boyd can handle themselves, since both he and SHINON think themselves to be the ultimate duo and the best members of the team. And once Grail dies, he and SHINON leave the Grail Mercenaries since he feels he's not fit to lead the team, but later he rejoins them alongside Astrid after he runs into Ike when their boat is being attacked by Dane. GATRIE returns in Radiant Dawn when the Grail Mercenaries rescue Lucia from being hung, and he along with the rest of the team join the fight against Benion as part of the Laguz Alliance. GATRIE, while being full of himself and often off in his own little world, is actually a very positive and friendly individual and gets along with the mercenaries very well, especially SHINON since they have a best friend relationship going on despite their bickering, and often they hang out together and even have dinner together. GATRIE is also very flirtatious as he hits on any girl he sees and just swoons at the sight of someone pretty. In fact, SHINON states that he'd hit on a tree if it were wearing a skirt. Gameplay wise, GATRIE being a general has high levels of defense, strength and HP, making him the tank of the team and the unit who's best for taking on enemies that come in hordes. In Path of Radiance, GATRIE is an overall solid unit and is rather well rounded, though he has slow speed even for a knight, so it will be hard for him to double a lot of enemies. In Radiant Dawn, GATRIE becomes a much better unit since he actually has rather high speed, especially for a knight, and all his other stats aside from luck and resistance are great too. This made GATRIE the ultimate tank unit as nothing could hurt him, and he could very often double the enemies that attacked him, so whenever there was a choke point in the map with enemies flooding in, GATRIE would be there to silence them completely. While GATRIE isn't my favourite general in the Fire Emblem series, he's certainly one of the best generals in the series and definitely the best general in the Tellier series. Being a solid unit in Path of Radiance and a badass in Radiant Dawn, GATRIE was one general you had no chance of breaking through or getting past. Unless you're a pretty girl, in which case GATRIE falls to his knees faster than a stack of dominoes. You know, sometimes it's amazing how much a unit can change for the better between games. In one game, they can go from a pointless character and all-around crappy unit to a fucking badass and essential member of your team, as well as a very interesting character that is tied heavily to the main story. If you haven't guessed by now, number 13 on this list is the best rogue in the Fire Emblem series, Soph. It's amazing how one game can change someone's opinion of an entire character. I mean, if we were just looking at Soph from his appearance in Path of Radiance, then he would be one of the worst characters in the game. But thankfully he was redeemed, and then some, in Radiant Dawn. Not just because he became a much more interesting character and a vital part of the main story, but also because he became one of the best, if not the best, early game units in Radiant Dawn and essential to victory unless somehow you manage to get the best case of RNG in Fire Emblem history. And knowing Radiant Dawn, that's not going to happen. Now, Soph, funny enough, was an optional character you could recruit in Path of Radiance, where he snuck aboard Ike's ship on their way to Bennion. The reason for him being a stowaway was that he was searching for a friend who was gone missing. In Radiant Dawn, we find out that that friend is Micaiah of the Dawn Brigade, and both Soph and her lead the group as they fight back against Bennion's rule of Edain. Soph pretty much acts as Micaiah's protector and closest friend, never leaving her side and always being there for her at all times, even if he doesn't agree with the decisions she makes. Soph is incredibly protective over Micaiah and would challenge anyone who poses a threat to her, even the Black Knight himself. Yes, Soph had the balls to take on the Black Knight. Effin' A, man. Effin' A. Because of how much he cares for her, Soph and Micaiah have a very brother-sister relationship, and I don't just mean they love each other and they will always be there for each other, but more along the lines of being there for moral support, as well as trying to persuade each of the other what they're doing is either right or wrong. Not to mention, these two will quite often bicker with one another, since Soph doesn't like the fact that Micaiah will help literally anyone and does everything the king asks, and Micaiah can't stand it when Soph talks so admirably about Ike. This also adds a lot more character to Soph, since you get to see how the events of Path of Radiance shaped him into more of a leader and a team player, as well as appreciating his fellow comrades and those closest to him, even if they do go out of their way to insult your former commander. But really, can you blame him, Micaiah? Ike really is something to behold, and you're not exactly a shining example of Fire Emblem Lords. This gets doubled by every single enemy, now are you? Gameplay wise, Soph in Path of Radiance sucks. Not only can you get a much better feat earlier on in the game, but Soph begins so underleveled that he can't do shit to anyone, and his only use will be to open chests if you decide to use him. In Radiant Dawn, Soph is the advanced unit you start with in the first part of the game, and he is vital to victory since your allies really can't do much against the enemies, especially when they come at you in waves. Being a rogue, Soph has high levels of speed and skill, and even though he has low strength, most of the time he'll avoid the enemy attacks, so he can be a very useful tank. Granted, he does suffer late game since a lot of other units are stronger than him, but if you train him correctly and give him the right weapons and skills, Soph can hold his own even against the endgame enemies. I know a lot of you might not be happy that Soph is on this list since he does suck in Path of Radiance, which is fair enough and I understand that, but I came to respect and appreciate him so much more in Radiant Dawn thanks to him actually being a unit who's more than useful, as well as being a much more interesting character. The events that took place in Path of Radiance are evident in his actions in Radiant Dawn, showing his growth and maturity as a character, and how his adventures with Ike shaped him into the man he is today, and that really helped to show him in a much more glimmering and radiant light. Now, throughout my time on YouTube, I've talked about various different Fire Emblem classes, both the best and the worst. But the one class I've neglected to talk about is the Archer class, and for the longest time people have been pestering me to express my feelings on this class. Well everyone, when it comes to the Archer class, I like them. I mean, yeah, they're not the best units ever, and they aren't that great starting out, but like Pegasus Knights, if you take the time out to level them up, they can be devastating, and even though what they can do is limited, what they do really well and completely wreck flying units. Now why is this relevant to number 12 on this list? Well, it just so happens that number 12 on this list is in fact an archer, and he is easily my favourite archer in the Fire Emblem series. And if any of you have guessed Rolf, well sorry, you're wrong this time, because it's fucking Shinon. I fucking love Shinon. Not only is Shinon, in my opinion, the best archer in the Fire Emblem series, despite claims to the contrary, he's also such a lovable dick that you just love to hate him sometimes, as well as being such a smooth and all-around badass character. Now like with Soph, if we were going by his appearance in just Path of Radiance, then Shinon probably wouldn't be on this list, or at the very least he'd be much lower down. However, thanks to his role in Radiant Dawn, Shinon was just so awesome! Now in Path of Radiance, Shinon was part of the Ground Mercenaries and one of the veterans alongside Titania and GATRIE. Unlike most of the Ground Mercenaries, however, Shinon is rather bitter, cold, cynical and sarcastic, as well as a bit of a jerk towards newbies like Ike. What's worse is that Shinon is also prejudiced against the Laguz, actively referring to them as subhumans. Once Grail dies, he, along with GATRIE, leaves the Ground Mercenaries and doesn't appear again until much later in the game when he is fighting against Ike and begrudgingly rejoins the group thanks to Rolf. In Radiant Dawn, Shinon is the one who sets Lucia free and joins the fight against Bennion despite still being otherwise racist towards the Laguz and still being a bit of a dick to Ike. If it wasn't obvious by now, Shinon is a bit of a dick. I mean, aside from the aforementioned cold, bitter and sarcastic personality, Shinon is also self-absorbed and even criticizes his only proper friend GATRIE. Despite this, his attitude is something you can't help but love at times for just how sarcastic he is, and there are times where Shinon shows that he does care about the mercenaries, and he often shows respect to those older than him, such as Grail, JRPG and the Laguz Kings. Gameplay is where Shinon truly shines, though this is more evident in Radiant Dawn more than in Path of Radiance. Not to say he's bad in Path of Radiance, in fact he was my main archer in that game. The problem is that because Shinon leaves later on, Rolf and Astrid are arguably the better options, since Rolf you can train throughout the entire game and he'll end up with better stats in the end, and Astrid, while being recruited later on in the game, has the skill Paragon to double her experience points, which allows her to catch up to and surpass your main units with ease. In Radiant Dawn, Shinon is a god! I mean, holy shit, Shinon was one of the best units in the game, which says a lot, trust me, and he was able to absolutely wreck every single unit that was in his line of sight. Shinon has very high levels of speed and skill, making it so that he will always hit you twice and never miss you. Not to mention, Shinon is pretty damn strong for an archer, and once he becomes a marksman, nothing, and I mean nothing, can stop him, and even bosses as powerful as Deginsia crumble before the awesome might of Shinon. Archers are a staple of the Fire Emblem series, and they're a class I do enjoy using and find them to be very useful at what they do. Shinon is easily the best archer in Fire Emblem history, and I have yet to use an archer as incredible as Shinon. Some of you may cry Rolf is better or plead Astrid can be great, but I'm sorry people, Shinon is where it's at, and I don't think I'll ever use an archer as great as him. Unless Fire Emblem Fates has anything to say about that. Number 11 on this list is a very similar situation to number 14, since this character, while not being the best unit from the class they represent, they themselves are still an awesome unit and one unit pretty much everyone can get down with. The class in question is none other than my second favourite class in the Fire Emblem series, the Pegasus Knight, and as such, number 11 on this list can only go to one of 3 entries, not including Alincia since she's a Queen class or Lord if you will, Sigrun, Marcia or Tanith, and well let's not kid ourselves here people, it's obviously Marcia. Marcia was one unit that shocked me like no other unit has in any Fire Emblem game. Not because she's a bad unit, because she isn't, or that she's the best Pegasus Knight ever, or even the best character ever, but that when I reached the end of Path of Radiance and the results showed the tally of the units with the most kills, Marcia came first. Yes, you heard me, Marcia, a Pegasus Knight, came first and got more kills than Ike, Soren, Jill, and Titania. Holy shit, I did not expect that, since while I love Falcon Knights, they aren't exactly known for their strength, and yet somehow she was able to get the most kills out of every character in the game. Christ, it's no wonder you were just shy of the number 10 spot. That award alone would grant you a place on this list. But there's more to Marcia than that, a lot more in fact, so let's see what this Path of Radiance powerhouse has to offer. Marcia made her debut in Fire Emblem Path of Radiance as a Benyon soldier. She is first seen trying to fight off pirates who want her dead, and thanks to Ike's team she makes out alive. She then later joins the Grail mercenaries in Chapter 9, and then reunites with her brother in Chapter 14, as well as continuing to help Ike during the Mad King's War. In Radiant Dawn, Marcia has become one of the Crimea Royal Knights, and is first seen chilling with Queen Alincia until Princess Liane is attacked by Benyon Draco Knights, and both her and Alincia have to fight them off with the assistance of Ha. From there, Marcia takes part in stopping the rebellion against Queen Alincia, and she is the first of the Knights to make it back to Alincia in the endgame of Part 2 to help out in the fight. One thing I like about Marcia is her personality. For the most part, Marcia is a cheerful and kind-hearted girl with a good heart and such, but occasionally she bursts into fits of anger and throws God knows how many insults towards her enemies, and more often than not her brother. Marcia just has this no-nonsense I don't take crap from anyone attitude, and I really like that about her. Despite this, a lot of people have high levels of respect for Marcia, as she performs her duties incredibly well and is often trusted with very important and dangerous tasks or missions. Gameplay wise, Marcia being a Pegasus Knight has high levels of speed, skill and resistance. In Path of Radiance, despite joining rather underleveled, she has rather well-rounded stats and doesn't have any major flaws, which again makes it all the more strange that she got the most kills in the game. So she was a very dependable unit, and thanks to her movement, she can be very useful when trying to reach far off enemies or rescuing those in danger. In Radiant Dawn, Marcia isn't used very often, so leveling her up can be somewhat difficult, but her HP and luck are higher than before, so she can last longer in battle, and very often she lands critical hits the majority of the time. Much like GATRIE, Marcia isn't my favourite Pegasus Knight, but man oh man is she an awesome Pegasus Knight, and good god does she shock me with that kill count at the end of the game. Funny, charming, scary, loud, sweet, offensive at times, a great unit and a great character, Marcia is a complete package and one unit who never once let me down, and to this day she has yet to do so.